The lecture we are going to review the central nervous system, brain. And in this picture you can see the whole central nervous system, which are brain and spinal cord in the green color, and the yellow or orange color are the peripheral nervous system. If I add the skeletal system to this model, you can see that the central nervous system is covered by the bones in the brain. The in this is in the cranial cavity in the skull, and also the vertebral column covering the spinal cord. So if I remove the skeleton, you can see the other parts, which is peripheral nervous system. They are out of these two skeletal parts. It's made by two hemispheres, right and left, and right in the middle they are separated from each other, and this is the part that we call it longitudinal fissure. The brain itself has a lot of sulcus and gyrus, sulci and gyri, and sulcus is the part that go deep, or the grooves, and gyrus or gyri, which is plural of the gyrus, are the ridges of the brain that you can see here. The cerebrum is the hemisphere of the brain, and if I just hide the others, you can see here we have the left cerebrum or left hemisphere, and is separated from the other parts. Each hemisphere have different lobes, and then we are going to take a look at lobes and the names here. But before we define the lobes, we need to define two sulcus. This is the one that I just colored in the green. This is the lateral sulcus, and this is also called fissure or fossa, and this is a deep groove which is located along the surface of the cerebral cortex. And it's one of the most prominent sulci in the brain. And the other one, if I just color it here correctly, yes, this green one, as you see, it's a central sulcus. So remember, central sulcus and the lateral sulcus are important in recognizing different lobes. The first lobe that we have is the frontal lobe, as you see here in the green. And frontal lobe is the part which is in the anterior part of the cerebrum, and also it's doing a lot of decision making and planning, or reward and attention. All neurons belong to here. You see that this frontal lobe is ended to one gyrus here, and this is the precentral gyrus. So if we have the central sulcus right here in front or anterior to this one, we have the precentral gyrus, which is actually the primary motor cortex that we will learn about it in physiology later. So if we take a look at the central sulcus one more time, right behind central sulcus you have the postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus here is also the primary sensory cortex that we have here. And then right behind this one, then we are going to look at the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe, as you see here. And then if we go a little bit back in the posterior, you have this small part, which is the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is the place that we have the visual processing center of the brain. And most of the visual cortex are there. So I back to the lateral sulcus, and then inferior to lateral sulcus we have the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe, and the temporal lobe is the primary auditory cortex is there, and it's involved in auditory or listening perceptions. It's also contained the hippocampus. Later we'll talk about it. Hippocampus involved with short to long-term memory, and also the spatial memory and behavior is connected to this part. I review very fast. Here we have the frontal lobe, we have the precentral gyrus, we have the central sulcus, postcentral gyrus, we have the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, we have the lateral sulcus, and we have the lateral sulcus, and we have the temporal lobe. In this lecture, we are talking about the basal ganglia. As you can see in this model, it's showed in green, and I'm going to separate the basal ganglia from the rest of the brain. This is the basal ganglia, right and left, and the basal ganglia is made by a group of deep nuclei in the brain, which they are cooperate together to control the motor function, also to set the learning routines, and also it involves in associative learning and emotional regulation. The basal ganglia is made by two major parts. The first part is called striatum. A striatum, which made by the caudate nucleus and the putamen. Here we have the caudate nucleus, and this is actually the anterior mass of a gray matter which projects into the anterior horn and extend along the body of the lateral ventricle. As you see, caudate nucleus have some projection that go and connect to the putamen. And this part of the putamen is the outer part, and it's also connected to the caudate nucleus, as you see by these projections. And behind this one, then we have the globus pallidus, which has two parts, as you see in the green. Globus pallidus, this is the lateral globus pallidus, and then we have the medial segment of this globus pallidus. Globus pallidus. Lecture, we are going to talk about the diencephalon. Diencephalon is a part of the forebrain and also have different parts. The major part of the encephalon, if I just get closer here, is a bunch of nuclei together that we know them as thalamus. Thalamus, as you see here, for example, some different part of the nucleus. This is the ventral anterior nucleus of the thalamus, and for example, this part is the anterior nuclei of the thalamus. And then if we take a look at different parts, you can see that this is the medial, for example, nuclei of the thalamus together. And then the thalamus is a part that do a function like a relay system. It means that it's processing some information that come from the afferent neurons toward, or sensory neurons, sensory information from the body toward the cortex, and it process them and then send them up. And also when it integration is happened and the motor function is produced by the cortex, it come to the thalamus first to be able to be processed and go down to the spinal column and sent to the body. And then the smaller part that we have here, if I just get a little bit closer, that we have here, we have the hypothalamus. So hypo means under, hypothalamus means under. Thalamus is a smaller region and have many functions like the controlling the body temperature, also sleeping and wake cycle, eating and drinking function, and also it releases some major hormones, which those hormones go through a part that we call it pituitary infundibulum or stalk, and then it reach to the pituitary or hypophysis, as other name, two names. And hypophysis, as you know, it's also known as master gland and produce a lot of hormones that control the body homeostasis. So, as a quick recap, you have the diencephalon as a part of forebrain, which is made by the different part of the thalamus and hypothalamus, and also the hypophysis. In this part, we are taking a look at the brainstem. Uh, Brainstem is the part that connects the brain to the spinal cord, and generally it have basic life sustaining functions like breathing, controlling blood pressure, swallowing, coughing. The brainstem have three parts. From upper part, it has midbrain, also known as mesencephalon. It also have pons that we have here, and also its lower part, which is medulla. If I just make it a little more clear, this is the medulla or medulla oblongata, the other name. And if we just think about the upper part, which is the midbrain, it's have some basic functions and helping or participating in the function of vision, hearing, and also sleep cycle. And then we have right under the pons, which connect to cerebellum. We are going to talk about cerebellum or a little brain. And the pons also do functions like facial expression or a sensation and helping to the body equilibrium. And also pons connected to the medulla, pons and medulla together, they are going to control the breathing. The breathing centers are there. But medulla oblongata also participating in the controlling the vasomotor functions, and also cardiovascular center is there, center of vomiting is there, and also the parts that we call them pyramids are in the anterior descending cortex of the spinal tracts that come from this side and go to the opposite side of the body from right to the left, for example. What else we can add here is the also, yes, the cranial nerves that also come from the brainstem, and then they are producing the sensory and motor function of the face and neck. So this is the brainstem, as I said, midbrain, pons, and the medulla, with a brief about their functions. The next part we are going to talk about is cerebellum, which means little brain. Cerebellum is in the place in the skull. We call it posterior cranial fossa. And if we look at cerebellum, we understand why they call it little brain. As you see, it also have two hemispheres that they are connected to with each other in a part that we know as vermis, right and left. And also it has two major lobes, as we know, posterior lobe here, and also the anterior lobe, as you can see here. Well, if we be able to just think about the part that is connected, you can see that it's connected to the pons, and then the information from the upper part, from the cerebrum, go here, and also from the lower part, from the spinal column, come to the pons and go there. And the function of the cerebellum is to coordinate of all the movements and make our balance and we understand our spatial perception, where we are in the space, where our hand or legs. And also it's working with the fine-tuned motor activities, like when you are writing something or playing piano. This is a kind of a part of the muscle memories, for example. In this lecture, I'm going to review some layers of the brain. We know them as meninges. But let's start to take a look at this cut of brain that you have both right and left hemisphere. And as you see here in this area, you have the white matter of the brain, which is deeper than the gray matter. This is the gray matter of the right and left hemisphere. And also, they are separated, these two hemispheres, by the flax cerebri, that this connective tissue that you can see here. As you see, there is a space between them right over here, and then here is the part that we call superior sagittal sinus. This is the area that we are going to talk about when the cerebrospinal fluid are absorbed toward the uh, arteries and veins. And as you see, there are some buds that come here, and they are called trabecule. As you see, one small one here, here, and here. The parts that bulge out, especially here in the sagittal sinus, and then they are going to absorb the cerebrospinal fluid. But let's start from another view and see uh, what layers are. The outer layer, as you see here, is our skin. We call it scalp. And scalp skin have this on the superficial fascia, and go to different layers like the epicranial aponeurosis that connected to the muscles, and go to the loose connective tissue. And if you just move your scalp or skin on your over your head, you can see a loosity, and this is the because of you have the cranial bones that their own circulatory system right under the cranial bones. Then we have the periosteal cranial dura matter, as you see here in the green, as I marked here. And also, as I explained here, we have the superior sagittal sinus. So if we look at this periosteal cranial dura matter, then we have also meningeal cranial dura matter. And remember, this matter is written with mater and not double T. And this different when we are talking about the gray matter, which is right matter, or the white matter. So this is the meningeal cranial dura mater, or simply we can call it dura mater. Right behind dura mater, we have the cranial arachnoid, which right under this arachnoid matter, we have also the arachnoid space. Arachnoid space is a space that get the name because it looks like the spider web. So arachnoid looks like a spider. You can see a very thin layer right under the this part. This is, I just make it the green, as you see, very thin layer. That this layer is able to go also to the sulci and cover over the gyri of the brain. And then this is called the pia mater. Mater means mother, and when we call, for example, dura mater, this is the dura mater, means the tough mother. And when we are talking about the this thin layer, it's pia mater, which is called soft mother. And then the cerebrospinal fluid, as also explained, will be gathered here in the superior sagittal sinus. It's a big sinus, and then it will be absorbed to the subarachnoid space, and it can be later uh, connected to the veins and arteries here and absorbed to the venous system also. And we explained the gray matter, which is, as you know, is the cell bodies of the neurons, and the white matter, which is made by the axons to be able to do the integration from the cerebral cortex. So this is the part that we call also cerebral cortex.